I'm Tracy Nicholas, and my co-host Tanya Carwyn and I are passionate folklore practitioners. To us, folkloring is more than a podcast. It's our commitment to help you connect with your roots and awaken the wisdom within you. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Folkloring. And today we are going to talk about the folklore and magic of metals. And we started this, it was going to be so much bigger than it was, but there's just an incredible amount of information. So for this episode, we are going to focus on iron, silver, and copper. But before we do that, Tanya, how have you been folkloring lately?
Hi, everybody. And yes, it's while we're here in springtime, right around when right around our last frost date. So there's a lot of gardening going on. And part of that is that we're building this little, it's not even that little, we're building this grape arbor trellis situation, but it's round, it's a circular structure which sits on top of this, like, sort of, we call it the peninsula. It's like an herb garden, and it's like raised above the rest of the garden and the pasture. It's like when you come out of our house is a little higher, and then like that peninsula kind of sticks out, and right on top of that, and it's like the edges is all strawberries, and on top is all like medicinal and magical herbs. And so on the top of that, we're building this grape arbor, which as it is going up, looks a lot like a pagan temple.
No.
it's like a wood hinge. Right now, it has half the rafters up as well. I'm looking at it right now. It has half the rafters up as well. So now it's starting to look a little bit more like a Celtic roundhouse, which is also really great. The thing about it though is that, or like why I think it's folkloring, is that the only part of the building that is not from our land is the screws that hold it together. The rest is all like wood, either from our land or things that like have been scavenged and have been here for a while. Like the rafters are part of an old fence that we took down, the wood stakes of the fence and stuff. So yeah, we're very excited about growing our own grapes. The grapes are on their way, the plants. And so we're hoping to get this all finished and built before the next fruit day, which is in 2 days, like we're planting by the moon. And we're hoping also that our grape plants will be there by then, so it can all go in the ground and start growing.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Tracy, what about you? How have you been folkloring?
Well, so at the time of this recording, we just had the eclipse, and I was fortunate enough to be in an area where we got about 95% of the eclipse. And I hear 100% is much, much cooler, but it was still very cool.
Yeah.
So, I took the time out to watch. And what makes that folkloring for me is my neighbors were out in their yard and they didn't have any glasses. And they had, the little like pinhole on paper, and they were, looking on the ground and, shining the sunlight through it. And I happened to have an extra pair. And so I was like, oh, hey, you guys, I was just using this extra pair to see if I could take a picture, like cover my phone camera with the lens and take a picture. And so I gave them the other glasses and we hung out and just, talked about it. And just sort of it was probably a half hour, 40 minutes. And I've lived next to them for almost 25 years. So I know them pretty well, but we never really hang out together. If I see them, I'll stop and talk. But then after that was over, I went out on a walk with one of my other neighbors. And when I came back, there was a little bag on my front porch with a little note in it that said, oh, thank you so much for letting us use these glasses. The experience was so much richer this way. And, we've never seen an eclipse before. And then she said, I had some extra tomatoes on hand. And so she gave me, a little bunch of tomatoes. And I was like, oh, that is
Lovely.
so wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah. So that was me for this time around.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. Yeah, we did not get a full eclipse here either. Last time we were very close. And so we drove. The kids were much younger. We took all the kids out of school and we drove. It was about an hour away for totality. And it was amazing. And this time, all the kids were elsewhere. And so it was my husband came home early to be in time for it. And yeah, we looked. It was pretty cloudy here too, so every once in a while you could safely look through the clouds.
Oh, wow.
But we had a colander, and that worked. We could see it.
Yeah, it was definitely the thing that surprised me most about it was how everything sort of got faded, like everything grayed out. It wasn't like a
Uh-huh.
typical dusk, you know? It
Right.
was just like everything looked not as bright as usual, and the colors dimmed, and that just really surprised me. I don't know why.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can only imagine how that must be if you don't, you have the science to back up with like what is going on or so. And even so, like I still found it kind of eerie and weird.
It's definitely very eerie.
Yeah.
That surprises me that it is, but it really is so strange. Especially, it's not like things don't ever get dark during the day. I mean, a storm rolled through earlier today, and it was like very, very dark. It felt like dusk, but for some reason, it was just different because the skies were very clear here. It was weird.
This thing that I noticed when we were the last time and we were in totality, the minute it's like total, right? It's like really dark.
Uh-huh.
Everybody starts screaming. There is this like you can, and so did we. And we were like just by ourselves in this little cove on a lake where there was nobody else around except like the minute you reach totality, you could hear it echoing around the lake. You could hear like so many people screaming. And then I saw some videos from this time around where people were in totality, and you hear the exact same thing. Like it's quiet, everybody's watching through their glasses or whatever. And then you hit totality, and everybody just like screams and howls, and with it seems like such a innate, like, why is that what we do?
Hmm.
I found that interesting.
And I think it's an unusual situation. And so it's exciting because it doesn't happen every day. I mean, it happens fairly regularly, but not fairly regularly everywhere. Like you'd have to travel to go see see the next
Right,
one that's coming, right? How
right,
cool would it be?
right.
So,
Totally.
all right.
Yeah,
Well,
so fun.
we should get on to metal.
Yeah, moving on.
And when I first, came up with this idea, I was thinking about all the different kinds of metal in the house, pots and pans and knives and tools, gardening tools and tools for, fixing up the house and all of that. And I got immediately mired down in just looking at knives. And I had pages
Yeah.
and pages of notes on just knives. And so decided that we go a little more basic and talk about several important types of metal that you will see in your day-to-day life. And as I said earlier, we focused on iron, silver, and bronze. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And even within that, it's not going to be a incredibly deep dive because there's so much lore, so many stories about metal. And as we've said before, metal is a very important thing in our lives. And so those are we write stories about the things that are meaningful to us and that help us survive. And so just to start us off, the Britannica definition, metal, any of a class of substances characterized by high electrical and thermal conductivity, as well as by malleability, ductility, and high reflectivity of light. So that's sort of the Britannica definition of metal. And in addition to that, about 3/4 of all known chemical elements are metals. The most abundant varieties on Earth are aluminum, iron, calcium, sodium, potassium, and magnesium. And the vast majority of metals are found in ores, which are mineral bearing substances. There are a few, however, such as copper, gold, platinum, and silver that occur in a free state because they don't readily react with other elements. And that's why people can go panning for gold, and it'll be, just out there, on the bed of a river or whatever.
Right.
And just to look at how important metal is, when we look at human prehistory, we've separated it into 3 time periods, right? The Stone Age,
Yeah.
the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. And this 3-age system was a concept that was adopted during the 19th century and broadly kind of grouped it into the eras in which we were making tools out of those different things. And that's kind of why we grouped it. So the Stone Age lasted about 3.4 million years and ended but sometime between 4000 and 2000 BC. The Bronze Age was about 3300 BC to 1200 BC. And then the Iron Age, 1200 BC to 600 BC, depending on the region, really.
It depends on when people start to use certain metals. And it's also interesting, I feel like the last couple of years, people start to classify certain periods also by Copper Age, which comes between stone and bronze, right? Because bronze is a mixture of copper and tin or an alloy. And so often now you start to see people saying, I think it's called a chalcolithic, a Copper Age coming between Stone and Bronze Age.
Interesting.
Yep.
So diving right into iron. So there's a couple of kinds of iron. There's wrought iron and cast iron. And also, there's also steel, which is an alloy of iron. Now, wrought iron, it has a very low carbon content in contrast to cast iron. And it's, tough, it's malleable, it's resistant to corrosion, and easily forge welded. But it's more difficult to weld electrically. And so it can be hammered, rolled, and otherwise worked when it's hot. Now, cast iron, which of course many of us have cast iron cookware, which we love to distraction, it has a carbon content of more than 2%, and its usefulness derives from its relatively low melting temperature. So it has, white cast iron, which I did not even know was a thing. All my cast iron is black. Yeah. It has a carbon combined into an iron carbide named cementite, which is hard but very brittle, and it allows cracks to pass straight through. There's gray cast iron, and that has graphite flakes. And then there's, of course, the cast iron that we all know, the black cast iron, which is really it's really a gray cast iron that has been seasoned. And so much debate on the proper use of seasoning, and maybe we'll talk about that, because I certainly have my own opinions.
Yeah, same. But people's opinions are strong on it. Yeah.
They are very strong, including how to clean them.
Yeah, that specifically. Yeah. A couple of years ago, the whole family was at Primitive Skills Gathering, and there was everybody was cooking for themselves, but they're by their tents or campsites or whatever, but there was a little dishwashing station, and I had my little cast iron pan with me, and I went to go do the dishes, and I had my cast iron pan in the bottom of the sink, and I was washing my dishes on top of it, and people were just around with oh, there's soap on your cast iron. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't at all. I wash my cast iron with soap most of the time.
Exactly.
Not huge amounts of suds or anything, but if it needs to be reseasoned, it gets a little layer of butter and it sits on the stove for a minute. But my cast iron gets used every day, and I have no issue with it sticking. And if it's dirty, I wash it with soap.
Yeah, I don't understand. It even gets to the point where people talk about the kind of soap you can use or not use. Yep. And there's a big debate about Dawn soap. I don't know why, but if you're just wiping it out and leaving, the old whatever, the food scraps and everything, that is nasty.
I think so.
Yeah, if you wash your cast iron and it, rusts up or whatever, you haven't properly seasoned it.
Right. Exactly.
That's the bottom line. The seasoning is, still on there. You don't wash that off with just, a regular soapy sponge. And, my cast iron, my oldest piece of cast iron is my mom gave it to me and her grandmother gave it to her. So
Wow, yeah, lovely.
it's been around for a minute. And
Yeah.
I definitely always wash it.
Yeah. I mean, there's some things like if I bake pancakes,
Mm-hmm.
I just wipe it out because that's like nothing. Like there's no
Right.
dirt in there. There's just like a little grease from the butter that gets wiped out. It's fine. But if I sear a steak,
Mm-hmm.
it gets washed, like,
Yeah.
and with soap.
Yeah.
Yep.
People like who leave it that way and then go back and cook. It's like, that's all bits of food that's been sitting out at room temperature for a day or a few days or a week. And you're
I
just,
mean, I think most people rinse it out, right? Like, God, I hope so. I think most people rinse it out. They just don't use soap. But yeah, even so, like things like, I mean, yeah, certain things I definitely use a little soap, but it's not like I let it soak in soapy water or anything. But
Mhm.
yeah.
But as you said, we are not the first to use cast iron. And the earliest
Yep.
cast iron artifacts date to the 5th century BC. And they were discovered in what is now Jiangsu, China.
Hmm.
And cast iron was used in ancient China for warfare, agriculture, and architecture.
Nice. I found that cast iron in Europe, however, wasn't used very much before the 1400s. They used wrought iron
Mhm.
before then, of course, but in the 1400s or the 14th century, actually, so the 1300s, they started using cast iron for making cannonballs.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Now, iron has an interesting property called ferromagnetism.
Hmm.
And that is a physical phenomenon in which certain electrically uncharged materials strongly attract other materials. And there are two materials found in nature. One is lodestone, otherwise known as magnetite, and
Hmm.
iron. And those two materials have the ability to acquire these attractive properties, and they're
Hmm.
called natural ferromagnets. So I thought that
Nice.
was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But iron, so the symbolism
Mhm.
behind iron, it symbolizes strength and protection against supernatural forces. And we see that a lot. We see that it's used to repel fairies or even harm fairies, used to repel spirits, witches, trolls. So it's interesting that it is seen as something so protective. And you can use it in purification rituals, for breaking enchantments, and it's often used in crafting amulets and talismans to give the wearer these protective properties.
Hmm.
And it's also been significant in fortifying buildings and providing stability because it is such a strong element.
Which is interesting because I looked up as you do the etymology of iron,
Mhm.
and it's actually, I find it a particularly interesting one. It comes from the Middle English iren, and that then comes from the Proto Germanic isarn, and that is probably an early borrowing from the Celtic Isaron, which then is suggested goes back to the Proto-Indo-European Isaro, which means powerful and holy, and that derives from the Proto-Indo-European ice, which means strong. And then we see cognates of it in Greek, where it means vigorous and strong, and also holy metal and strong metal, as opposed to the softer bronze or copper.
Mhm.
So from very early on, it was considered like a holy, special, extra metal.
Mhm. Yeah, and we're going to take a look at some of the different beliefs from around the world. And I think that I'm going to try and not make this just a big long list of things, but there is just so much lore, as I said earlier.
Yep.
Now, the ancient Egyptians, for them, iron represented the divine power of gods and pharaohs.
Uh-huh.
As you said, For the Greeks, it was strength and resilience of heroes. And in Greek
Mm-hmm.
mythology, Perseus undertakes the quest to slay the Gorgon Medusa. And he was armed with a shield, a mirrored shield made of iron. And that's how he was able to, avoid eye contact and avoid turning to stone, which gave him the ability to triumph over Medusa.
Yeah.
Which is folklore with a lot of issues to me, because Medusa was really only protecting herself.
Right.
And so she was attacked and given the ability to protect herself and then attacked for that. So, but there it is. That's the mythology. And in Norse mythology, the god Thor wields an enchanted hammer, Mjolnir, and it's capable of summoning thunder and lightning, as we all know from the recent movies. And yeah, it's his defense against the forces of chaos. And it is, the iron hammer is representative of his role as protector of humanity.
Which is then interesting because you see that mirrored in other thunder gods like Perkunos and like other Slavic gods. And then I always found it really interesting that the hammer is such an emblem of blacksmiths, right? So, and then you see going back so far, a blacksmith always having kind of a hero or almost divine status within cultures that start to work iron. So I always found that interesting. And you still see the whole, grounding rods and things like that. Metal is still known to attract thunder.
Yeah, I think that it is very interesting with the blacksmith and the lore around the blacksmith, because that was definitely a time when, the blacksmith was central to providing, these tools and things, that it definitely was still a time that was advantageous for people to be physically very powerful and, helped them in life. And of course, the blacksmith, that's some hard work right there. And so that's going to be a pretty strong person.
Yeah.
And so just, tying that in together with the strength of the iron makes perfect sense why there'd be lots of stories about the blacksmith as protector.
Yeah, we'll get to some blacksmith deities a little bit further into the episode, but yeah, for sure.
And in Celtic mythology, the Iron Age represents an era of enlightenment and progress, and symbolizes that transition from chaotic to order. And that transformative period was believed to have brought about a harmony between humans, gods, and nature. And according to legend, cold iron has the power to repel, constrain, and seriously harm fairies, as I said earlier. And even, I've got in my collection of never-ending jewelry that I have, I've got a troll knot that is supposed to protect you from trolls, which I love very, very much. Now, in Japanese folklore, there was a legendary sword called Kusanagi no Tsurugi, also known as the grass cutter. And it's said to be forged from iron. And it's one of the 3 sacred treasures of Japan. And the weapon is associated with divine authority and the power to control the changing tides of fate. So that's pretty interesting. And in African folklore, iron is linked to ancestral spirits and believed to possess transformative powers. And they have rituals and ceremonies that involve iron. And through that, individuals can communicate with spirits of their ancestors and receive guidance, wisdom, and blessings, which is, it's interesting to me that it seemed to repel, spirits, but then in this way, it's drawing the ancestral spirits to you.
I think what I see is that the repellent force of iron really focuses on nature spirits, which I think I could make a case for it being once we get iron plows and scythes and things like that, it's just so much easier to subdue nature. Iron axes, like you can plow a field much easier with an iron plow, or cut down a tree much easier with an iron axe, things like
Mhm.
that. So I think the symbolism of iron repelling nature spirits might find its origin there, but that would not be the case with ancestors, like human
Right,
ancestors.
right, right.
Yeah.
So some of the things that people have traditionally done with iron around the house in Ireland, it was advised to keep an iron knife near an infant's cradle to prevent fairies from abducting the child, and as you said, repelling those nature spirits. And in Scotland, it was common to bury an iron bolt at the entrance of a newborn lamb's fold to block fairies from substituting out a changeling lamb, which is
Ah,
interesting. Yeah, I had heard of, human changelings, of course, but yeah, not animal changelings. So that was interesting to me.
yeah, uh-huh.
Now, English farmers would place iron horseshoes over their barns and cottages. And I think that, we see that still today. A lot of people have horseshoes that are hanging
Yep.
for luck. And we've talked about that in previous episodes. And, again, it was an iron horseshoe repelling evil spirits or bringing good luck. And surrounding a cemetery with an iron fence was thought to contain the souls of the dead.
I also read that and I never realized, but so many cemeteries, right? An iron fence around it.
Uh-huh.
Interesting.
Yeah. And you also see there are certain graves that have those iron cages over them.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of people say, oh, it's, if they're vampires, then they can't get out. I think that it's much more realistic that those were put on there to stop grave robbers
Yeah.
from, yeah, back in the day when that's how, it was hard to get bodies and
Mhm.
doctors wanted them to practice on and to study.
Yeah.
So I think that that's definitely a much more likely in almost all of those cases.
Yeah.
Although they certainly did have graves that had, a little like air hole and a bell in case someone did happen to wake up in the grave. That was
Uh-huh.
a big fear. Let's see. So burying an iron knife under the entrance to a person's home was alleged to keep witches from entering. I won't be doing that because all of my witch friends are welcome. And it's used for amulets, in gree pouches, and witch bottles, certainly.
One of the ones that I learned a long, long time ago, when I lived in New York City, I took this little candle magic class at this little witch shop. And one of the things they told us to always put, you always have a lodestone and you
Uh-huh.
feed your lodestone with iron filings and you always put, and like they then become magnetic. And then you always put a little sprinkling of those iron filings in the bottom of your candle jar for attraction.
Interesting.
Yeah,
That's great.
I love that one. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And so we talked a little bit about blacksmiths, but maybe we should get a little bit more into that now.
Yeah, so we see a lot of our myths and legends that we still have access to, yeah, either through written sources or through oral history. A lot of those arise from the time when people were moving from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age, and the use of iron really made a significant difference in the culture of people.
Hmm.
And basically, if your neighbor had iron and you didn't have iron, your neighbor was very likely to come over and now rule you, right? It was like,
Hmm.
it was really very important. So we're seeing a lot of myths and legends still from that time trickling through to the present. So, with the use of iron, of course, not everybody is a blacksmith, but most towns and villages had a blacksmith. And the folklore that arose around them became pretty massive.
Hmm.
And it depicts them as figures both of respect in the mundane world, like you need a blacksmith, right? If
Right.
you're a culture that uses iron, you need a blacksmith, but also a lot of respect and even fear in a mystical way for them, because they were not just like considered these amazing craftsmen, but also magicians in some sense. And so we also see a lot of deities associated with blacksmithing. So you have smith gods from many cultures. And of course, one of the most famous mythical blacksmiths is Hephaestus from Greek mythology. And he was revered as the god of blacksmiths, of fire, and of metallurgy. Yeah, he's famously depicted as crafting the weapons and the armor for the gods of Olympus. And he had an injured leg, right? Because he was thrown out of Olympus and now he walked with a limp, which is interesting, which you also see in Norse and Germanic mythology. Wayland the Smith
Uh-huh.
is also a master blacksmith. His story is pretty rough, but he was, I think his Achilles tendon was cut to keep him from running away.
Right.
Yeah, so he, a master blacksmith, but also a magician, and got away from his captors eventually by creating this set of wings, and then that's really reminiscent of Icarus, right? So, and I find that interesting. So far away from each other, the Norse mythology and then the Greek mythology, and they both are smiths with injured legs. I would assume that that indicates an earlier origin between the two of them.
That's interesting too, with the injury, because, and I had thought it was he got thrown off Mount Olympus, and that was what crippled him. And
Uh-huh.
the thought that the gods would need to do something, that they considered him so powerful that they would need to harm him in order to control him. And that really, I think, speaks to the importance of that the blacksmith as a protector and as a strong figure.
Uh-huh. Like he's so strong that unless we maim him somehow, there's no controlling him. Yep. Interesting. In Irish mythology, we have Gobnew, which I think is how it's pronounced. I'm not 100% sure. He's the divine blacksmith who forges the weapons for the gods. And those weapons were said to always hit their mark and be fatal upon striking. So, in general, when we're looking at the lore, it always emphasizes the blacksmith's role as a liminal figure. So, not quite in this world, not quite in the other world, not quite as liminal as maybe a priest, for example. But you find, for instance, the story of St. Dunstan. He's a historical figure and a blacksmith who ended up becoming the Archbishop of Canterbury. And it includes tales of him outwitting the devil using his blacksmithing tools. And then one of the oldest fairy tales that we still have, and I think they say it goes back 6,000 or 7,000 years, is the story of the devil and the blacksmith, and a very similar kind of idea, like the blacksmith outwits the devil using his craft.
Yeah, definitely. Blacksmith and iron have shaped, our stories, our culture, and, still to this day, obviously we're creating our own lore about whether or not to use Dawn dishwashing soap on our pans.
Yep.
But yeah, very important. So the next thing that we're going to look at is silver. And silver is a softer metal, and it's a reflective gray metal, and it's used for coins, jewelry, household utensils, and it has the highest electrical conductivity of any known element.
Oh.
Yeah, and the highest thermal conductivity of any metal. So that's why it's so useful in electronics and different like scientific uses for it, because it has those properties. Interestingly, silver also has antibacterial properties.
Yep.
It can be used to coat surgical devices, and historically, it was popular for tableware. Although now, of course, we have flatware because it's expensive. But I thought that was interesting that it had these antibacterial properties, and people tended to use it for eating, which makes a lot of sense. I also found that it makes the best flutes due to the way that the wind moves across the surface of the metal. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely.
So silver is associated with the moon, and it's linked to lunar energy, feminine power, intuition, and dreams. It also has protective qualities and can be used to ward off evil spirits and provide psychic protection. And it's interesting because I've always been drawn to silver. I have never
Uh-huh.
been a fan of gold jewelry. I've never worn it. I've always gotten silver.
Yeah, same.
It is definitely associated with magic, divination, and connection to spirit. It also symbolizes wealth and abundance because, as we know, it is expensive. And the protective qualities, obviously, we know that werewolves and sometimes vampires are believed to be vulnerable to silver. You get your silver bullets.
Yeah.
Now, silver can also repel fairies, but it is less dangerous to them than iron. So be careful because it will irritate the fairies and it's not quite as dangerous. So stick with your iron if you're worried about the fairies. Now, silver is used in healing, and symbolically, it's considered a purifying element. It's been used to treat any number of illnesses historically.
Mhm.
Traditionally, water that had been stored in a silver container or into which silver coins had been placed would be given to a patient or used to wash wounds.
Right. And people still nowadays, like it kind of in the health sphere, the natural health sphere, colloidal silver is very popular. And it definitely is. And it has a long tradition of being used topically as an antibacterial wash. And it's very useful for that. I really, really am concerned about people taking huge amounts of it internally, but to each their own, I guess.
I've never done a lot of research on it, but it just didn't make a lot of sense to, be taking it internally.
Same.
Although I will admit, back in the day, back in my 20s, I have done one or two shots of Goldschlager, so I have taken that internally.
Yeah.
Also, it has antibacterial properties and it has been used in wound dressing. They even have like silver coated band-aids now. I don't know if I can use that brand name, but that it's believed that those will reduce the likelihood of infection and inflammation.
Oh, I find that interesting.
Yeah. And wearing silver jewelry is said to help heal and calm the mind and to help clear the lungs and throat, to increase circulation and purify the blood, to balance the hormones, and to slow the progression of degenerative brain disease. So pretty much
Mm.
takes care of everything, I guess.
Yeah.
It's also said to draw negative energy from the body to make way for positive energy. And you mentioned lodestone earlier.
Yeah.
Lodestone set in silver is said to help improve eyesight.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, as I said earlier, silver is a great conductor of energy, and it is thought that that includes magical energy. And any stone set in silver, it'll amplify that stone's properties and make its
Ah,
energy more easily directed.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even like holy water it's said that it's best stored in or distributed from a silver container because the silver will infuse the holy water with its purifying energy.
Huh.
And the same is true for those of you that make moon water. Its silver container will definitely boost the energy of that.
Interesting. Do you know if that still happens in Catholic churches? Is the holy water stored in silver?
I believe I'm not allowed to go in Catholic churches anymore. So
Oh no.
no, I have not been in a church in a very long time, except when I was traveling and seeing, some of the older, beautiful, beautiful churches. I was in a church in Wales not too long ago, and it was lovely, but I don't remember seeing the holy water container there.
I'd be curious.
Yeah, I'll have to look for that. And if anybody has any knowledge on that, we would love to hear about that. Now, the Incans, I don't know why I didn't get to this mythology earlier, but they believed that silver was the tears of the moon.
Yeah, so beautiful.
Yeah, and so that back to that connection of the celestial, the moon energy and silver. And I think that in that culture, both were considered, both were highly valued. So, magical applications for silver. They can be used as ritual tools, and silver can also be used to make the tool itself, such as chalices, talismans, athames, but it can also be used to consecrate those tools.
Mm-hmm.
Silver can be used for divination, pendulums, scrying mirrors, and it also is said to sort of boost the divination, the strength of the divination, and help receive messages. And it can be used if you're doing lunar magic, you're doing a full moon ritual, something like that, and that'll help
Yeah.
boost the power of the ritual. It is said to amplify psychic abilities and facilitate spirit communication. And people use it to enhance their magical workings. So if you wear a piece of silver jewelry, and it's said that if you wear a piece with moonstone, it will aid in dream work and encourage prophetic dreams. So you're boosting the power of the moon and the moonstone to help you with those dreams.
Yep.
Yeah, lots of spiritual and magical uses for silver, and it's so pretty.
What I found when I went looking for deities associated with silver was that they're basically the moon gods and goddesses are kind of by definition, related to silver or associated with silver. So I could not find any specific like this deity has, really just to do with silver. It's usually a moon association.
Well, it's interesting too, because when we were talking earlier about vampires and werewolves, if silver is associated with the moon, like the werewolf comes out at the full moon, but then is hurt by silver.
Yep.
The same with the vampire, comes out in the silvery moonlight, but then silver is not considered to be good for them.
Right.
That's an interesting juxtaposition. I wonder how that came to be. But anyway, next we want to talk about copper.
Yeah.
And copper is very important in the history of man. It was one of the first metals ever mined, and it was over 10,000 years ago people started working with it. And gold and iron may have been used earlier than copper, but we learned to smelt copper before we learned how to smelt iron.
Yeah.
It's generally found in nugget form, and sometimes it's like a rough crystal like clumps or strands, and it is very malleable. So it's a popular metal to use for jewelry and tool making, though it is a soft metal. So it's too soft to use for most tools, but it can add malleability to harder and more brittle metals to create alloys such as bronze and brass.
Yeah.
Copper is also another excellent conductor for energy, such as heat and electricity, and has been used historically in wiring and cookware. And I have a lovely copper bottom pan, and it is so nice to cook in.
Nice.
It also is said to be an excellent conductor for magical and spiritual energy. Now, in the Ozarks, people wore copper rings or carried copper beside the skin to treat rheumatism. It's funny, though, because I'm in Illinois, and my mom, when she got older, she started wearing a copper bracelet every day for just that reason.
Uh-huh.
I think that's more widespread than just the Ozarks.
Right.
But in the Ozarks, apparently copper wire around the ankle was particularly popular because they could cut off lengths of telephone wire and get it. Yeah.
Telegraph wire. Yeah. So fun.
Yeah. Copper also has natural antibacterial and antimicrobial properties, making it useful, interestingly, for doorknobs and faucets and other places likely to collect bacteria. And the ancient Egyptians did use copper to sterilize wounds and drinking water as well. And I'd be interested to see how that compares to silver.
Right. Yeah. And how did they store it, soak it in water and then use that water, or how was the copper used to sterilize wounds and drinking water? I'm curious.
It's interesting. I know in a past episode we talked about the Mishipeshu, which is a Native American creature, the water panther. And one of the things that creature did was protect the natural copper stores found in waterways.
Ah, right.
Yeah. And we see, copper oxidizes. We've all seen that patina, the lovely green patina. And that oxidation does have a purpose. It protects the metal from degrading.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. I didn't know. I've always loved the color and the look of that, but I didn't know that it had a purpose that way. So it's been used by various ancient civilizations for tools, jewelry, sacred objects. And it's also associated with the alchemical element of Venus. and is
Hmm.
connected to the transformative power of love, beauty, and harmony.
Yeah, you see when you're talking about like astrological magic, things like that too, like the metals used, like if you were to make a talisman for something, right? You would make it out of silver on the hour of the moon or out of
Mhm.
copper on the hour of Venus, things like that. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like I was saying, in native cultures, it's often used as protective jewelry. It's highly valued.
Hmm.
And they too believed that it had healing properties.
Yeah. In Greek mythology, you see copper being associated with Aphrodite, which is like, the counterpart to Venus, goddess of love and beauty. And historically, there it was used to make decorative items such as jewelry to sort of channel that energy. In Slavic mythology, I found a deity who is called the Mistress of the Copper Mountain, and she's also known as the Malachite Maid.
Uh-huh.
A malachite is a stone, like a green stone that is formed when copper deteriorates
Oh,
in the earth. And she is a character who embodies the protective and benevolent aspects of copper. And she is also seen as the guardian of this particular mountain in the Urals that is full of copper and has been historically mined for it. She's the guardian of that mountain and its treasures. And she is kind to honest and skillful people and miners, but very harsh to the greedy. And she's a protectress of those miners.
that's very interesting. I have always loved malachite,
Hmm.
and I bought a bunch of it while I was working in South Africa once, and it's very, popular there. Now, malachite, which is just beautiful, gorgeous, gorgeous color, and I had not known that about it coming from copper, but
Yep.
it also is when people are carving it, or if it breaks or whatever, you have to be super careful with it because it is incredibly toxic if you were to breathe in the dust
Wow.
from it. So yeah, malachite is definitely something to be respected.
I had no idea. I did know that it was formed with copper, and it has all the similar like associations, right? Love, beauty,
Yeah.
all that protection, all that stuff. Yeah.
So much as other metals, copper has the beliefs that it has protective qualities. It's believed that it can ward off evil spirits, promote good luck, and protect against illness or negative energy. And a bit of copper placed in the kitchen will attract money. And I am definitely
Nice.
going to have to put that on my kitchen altar now.
I'm also thinking like, what do I have that's copper that I can just put in the kitchen real quick? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I've got a bunch of copper because one of my games is about Mishipeshu, and I
Uh,
included some copper nuggets in that game for
oh,
people.
that's lovely.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, I have copper jewelry because it's one of my favorite metals for sure. And I have a bracelet that I actually made myself out of copper. And it is like, you don't have to heat copper to hammer it, but it still takes a minute
Mhm.
to bend it and shape it. But yeah, I have that. I have several copper bracelets. So maybe one will go in my kitchen.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really cool that you can just dive in and do that. I'm gonna have to look into. I love making jewelry.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever made anything with copper though.
Yeah. Oh, it's lovely. I mean, just copper wire in and of itself is great.
Mhm.
This this was a workshop that I did, and they just had thick copper. I guess it's still called wire, even though it's thick. And you would cut it how long you needed it, and then just spend a couple of hours hammering it into the right shape.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, does that copper, does it the stuff that you made, does that have a patina? Does it develop a patina?
No, I mean it gets kind of dark if I don't wear it for a while. It doesn't. It's never been left alone long enough to like get the green patina. It'll leave some marks on, like if I wear it in the shower or so, it'll leave some marks on my arm. But yeah.
Interesting. See, I've got one that my mom had given to me at some point, and it's never even darkened. And
Oh,
I'm wondering if there isn't some sort of coating on it to prevent that from
yeah,
happening, which then
yeah.
makes me think if she was wearing it, in order to, help with her arthritis.
Uh-huh.
Wouldn't that
Uh-huh.
coating have prevented it? But
I don't know. I guess it depends on how conductive that is. I don't understand. I don't know the mechanism through which copper is beneficial for arthritis. So, yeah.
yeah, I mean, you'd think that you would have to actually have contact with the skin for it to be useful, but if it has a placebo effect, maybe it doesn't matter.
Right.
And wearing copper will attract love, health, and prosperity. Now, copper is not dangerous to fairies, but they can't manipulate it, although they may use it to boost their magic. So copper is
Oops.
a lot better for fairies than some of the other metals out there.
Yeah.
So for magical uses, we talked about how it's highly conductive and it is known to conduct and amplify energy. And so you can use it in rituals and spells to enhance the flow of energy or direct it toward a specific intention. And copper is associated with healing and balancing energies. And so you can use it in ritual, you can use it as a talisman or jewelry to promote physical healing, emotional well-being, energetic equilibrium. It is considered a metal of luck and abundance.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can use it in charms or rituals if you're, trying to draw abundance and wealth and prosperity. And copper is also linked to love and relationships. So again, copper is pretty much good for everything. And as with silver, any healing stone set in copper, it will amplify the effect of that stone. And it's
Nice.
also said that copper can help to bring emotions into balance. So maybe I should start wearing copper a little bit more frequently. In magic, healing work, fertility spells, prosperity spells, spells to attract love, and just everything in the kitchen sink with copper. And it would make a beautiful kitchen sink, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Bathtub.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so much better. You've seen those like crystal bathtubs. I would much rather have a copper bathtub.
Oh, same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can also use copper in a wand. And so that will help to enhance and direct the energy that flows through the wand. So if you want to attach some copper piece or make a wand out of copper, that will enhance the energy.
Nice.
So what can people do? What kind of folkloring can people do with the various kinds of metals we've discussed today? We've talked a
Mm-hmm.
bit about cooking and
Yeah. I think maybe starting out with an awareness of how much metal is in our lives as it is, right? Like, and so maybe if you don't choose to have silver in your house so much, or you don't choose to wear silver jewelry, that might be one that is not around all that often. But like electrical wiring is often made out of copper. Like iron is literally everywhere in your house. I think like having just the awareness of it, of its importance in our lives, that right there, I think is a good starting point.
yeah, I mean it's pretty ubiquitous, isn't it? I'm just looking around at all of the metals surrounding me.
Yeah.
And that is always at the heart of folkloring, right? Is that
Right.
it's about how you interact in a mindful way with the folklore that exists everywhere around you.
And also, honestly, like maybe consciously detaching from that for a minute. And like I'm mostly speaking about iron right now. Like my husband and I were talking about, how we want to garden and things like that. And he was saying like, don't want like any metal tools in the garden anymore. And I was like, wait, what are you saying? Like, what are we using? And he was like, well, like a bone hoe maybe, or like a wooden shovel or something like that, which made me think of like, yeah, like, can you just take a like a 10-minute break from metal, right? Like just being outside, not in a house that is full of nails and copper wiring and all those things. I was like, so I think just being aware of how ubiquitous metal is in our lives, and have gratitude for all it does for us, and also like maybe consciously every once in a while taking a metal break.
That's very interesting because
Yeah.
I was just thinking about, okay, I can go, there's a nature center that's across the street from me, and I can go hide behind the the big berm that separates the road from, where I'd be enjoying the canal. But I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. My shoes have metal eyelets in them. My,
Yep.
my jacket has a zipper.
Yep.
And, just trying to think about how, for me, if I were to wear shoes that didn't have metal in them in my current state, they would be made out of some kind of plastic, like my flip-flops, or, like, I mean, so
Yep.
that's not really much better. I maybe I need to
Yep.
craft myself some leather, some handcrafted leather shoes.
For real. Yeah, I've been really kind of getting into this whole grounding situation because I tend to also like in the summer, it's flip-flops in the garden, right? Or unless I'm like, doing really heavy stuff. And I've been trying to be way more conscious of going barefoot whenever I can. Because I mean, and that's like, it sounds like a bunch of woo-woo, but I think there's like some pretty significant science behind it where it decreases inflammation and stress and, increases negative ions and all that stuff. So, yeah, and it's interesting, right? Like just thinking about how hard it is to get away from metal or
Mhm.
plastic or any of that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and even, clothes that are stretchy are going to have that plastic in it. And
Yep.
yeah, it definitely is everywhere I'm looking now. I'm looking around my dining room
Uh-huh.
and it's just everything. Everything has metal. Even my
Yep.
lipstick my lipstick thing has a little metal
Yeah.
band on it.
I think like I get really obsessed with like early forms of woodwork where there's like no nails used. It's all like wooden joinery and things like that. Like I wonder about that, right? Like it is a working iron is definitely a sign of civilization. And then you find so much in the lore about how iron is used to ward off spirits and fairies and nature spirits. And like what if I don't want to ward those off all the time, right?
Right.
How do
Right.
I, yeah, right. How do I sink myself into a more pre-civilized container, right? How
Right.
do
Right.
I,
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so a metal brake, maybe, if you want to try that. Other things that you
yeah,
can actually do with metal, though, we've talked about good luck charms, jewelry. You can make some beautiful sounds with wind chimes or
yeah,
music with singing bowls or a gong or cymbals and bells. And
yep.
even if you are so inclined and you want to do a little belly dancing, you've got, those little coins on the wrap that goes
Yeah.
around that. And we've talked about, using it for protection, the horseshoes, the iron knife, jewelry. You can use it to keep out rodents.
Mhm.
And I have definitely used steel wool to, I have over 100-year-old house. And wow, it's almost 125 years old now. So there are lots of holes clogged with steel wool for just that reason.
Uh-huh.
And also, you can beat on pots and pans, which people use for protection. I think we talked about that in our New Year's episode.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one. You can use these different metals in ritual. If you've got a cauldron and you want to, light something, something like that,
Yeah.
or, an athame or a chalice. And so lots of uses for metal in ritual for all the reasons that we've talked about.
We talked about lodestones a little bit earlier. I find that a very, yeah, I guess, a pre-civilization sort of way of connecting to iron. I'm a big fan of lodestones. They can be used for attracting all sorts of energies and outcomes.
And you can use them with your iron filings, as you said earlier.
Yeah, I think the way I was taught is that that's what feeds them. Like how you would feed an ancestor or something like that, a
Mhm.
fairy,
Oh, okay.
you feed a lodestone, you feed them iron filings.
Interesting. Speaking of feeding, you can also eat foods that are high in iron, like dried
Mhm.
fruit, dark leafy greens, nuts, whole grains, red meat. And as we said earlier, it's not just eating those foods, it's being mindful of, what it is that you're putting into your body and how you think about the protection of iron.
And I would say avoid iron fortified foods because that doesn't seem to do a good job for a human body.
Mm-hmm.
In feng shui, metals are also used. I'm not a feng shui expert, but you can definitely look up some. I think they're called remedies or perfect placements for the right kind of metal in the right direction of your house.
Interesting. Yeah, I used to have someone had gone to Japan and gotten me one of those little compasses that you use for feng shui, and that the needle on it was definitely metal, although
Sure.
the thing itself was bone.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, lots of stuff you can do around the house. That's everything I have as far as folkloring. How about you, Tanya?
I just wanted to mention one more little metal trick with gardening, where it is said that copper deters snails and slugs. And so, what you often see is this idea of putting pennies around plants that are being attacked by slugs. And then the story is that most recent, like last 20 or 30 years or so, of pennies don't really contain any copper anymore. Regardless, I have tried it in the past and it does really work.
Oh,
A little ring of pennies around a plant it has been my experience, no more slugs will eat it.
interesting. I'm definitely going to have to try that this year because I do get slugs.
Yeah, us too.
That's fascinating. Well, thanks for that tip.
Yeah, and that's all I had.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us for our initial talk on metal. If you want to hear more about different metals, we're happy to dive into another episode that deals with some of the other important metals that humans have used throughout the ages. So just let us know, send us a note. You can email us at folkloringpodcast@gmail.com. You can drop a message on our Instagram or our Facebook page and just let us know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, and thanks again for listening. Thanks for all y'all's feedback. We enjoy it a lot, and we hope to see you next time.
As always, thanks for listening to Folkloring. If you liked what you heard, please consider giving us a rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. If you have any questions or comments, or would like to suggest a topic for a future episode, please email us at folkloringpod@gmail.com or message us on Facebook or Instagram. You can find Tanya at Folklore Home Companion on Instagram, where she writes about European folklore and traditional life. You can find Tracy at the Folklore Podcast as the theater, film, and storytellers correspondent and producing the Stories from the Hearth podcast. Hope to talk to you again soon.